Welcome to the first episode of Life in Perspective, filmed from my humble abode that I like to call Camelot. This is the round table that I made, my own bare hands, and it will be the centerpiece for hopefully many discussions with friends, invited guests, and other like-minded people, and some not so like-minded, so we can have some discussions about all sorts of things. The first few episodes will be scripted to discuss certain ideas that I want to cover, and then as time goes by, and hopefully more of you start to listen to Life in Perspective, we will start talking about the things that you want to hear about. So I guess the first question is, why podcast? Well, in podcasting, we have the means to tell stories, and stories are the primary way in which people recall information. I listened to a podcast just recently that talked about this very thing, and the example they used was the Bible, saying that the Bible was one of the biggest, most read books in the world. But if you ask people to quote the commandments, they wouldn't necessarily be able to tell you. I think statistics say something like 17% of Americans, who are quite a God-fearing country, can recall the 10 Commandments in their entirety. More people could tell you the ingredients of a McDonald's burger than they can tell you what is in the commandments. But most people will be able to tell you a story from the Bible, whether it be about Jesus or Moses or whoever it happens to be. Somebody's always going to be able to tell you a story from the Bible. And what they say is that when you hear information, language only accesses or activates one part of the brain, but when you hear a story, it turns on a wide spectrum across the brain, so you actually recall more information. Sorry, you have to excuse me for a minute. I'm trying to make my protein pancakes for tomorrow. I've got a busy day at work, so yeah, I'll tell you about protein pancakes another day. We can have a chat about what they are about and why. So yeah, when you hear story, you recall it better because it activates a wider section of your brain. So when you talk about smells or sounds or different things within a story, it activates other parts of the brain, and that is why you are able to better recall it. So have a think about that one yourself. Think about something that you've read that was mainly about statistics or facts, figures and numbers versus a story that you've heard, whether it's like a tale that you've heard from a friend in a coffee shop or around the table at work or in a pub or something like that. You'll be able to recall the finer details from a story that's been told to you by someone than you will necessarily be able to tell from just key information, facts and figures from, I don't know, a policy or a law or a rule change or something like that. So have a look at that. So the podcast I'm talking about is by Tim Ferriss, and it's taken over for the day by Stephen Dubner. And the podcast is about the power and the art of storytelling. So I recommend that you go and watch them and see what Stephen Dubner has to say on the Tim Ferriss podcast. It's a really powerful message about the art of storytelling and how we can use that to get the information across, and with it we have a better way to recall the information later on when we're on the move. So the other reason why I like to use podcasts, I think, moving forward, is because having been recently got back from travelling, I found that I used to like to listen to a lot of podcasts whilst on the go, and I think it's a really handy way to get information over and to take it on board whilst you're on the go. So whilst people are commuting and travelling backwards and forwards, driving or on the train or whatever, it's a really easy and simple format to get information across to people rather than have to sit down and read through an article or a blog post or something like that. So that's the reasons why I've decided to focus on podcasting for, well, the next little while. So that's why podcasting hopefully going to enable me to tell you story through narrative. You can listen to this hopefully on any of the podcasting servers, and if I make the effort to actually publish it as a video, perhaps you'll be able to catch it on one of the streaming sites, or maybe from time to time I'll even do some periscoping, Snapchat, Instagram stories. We'll see how it goes. So that's why podcasting. In terms of Life in Perspective, why Life in Perspective? Well, several years ago I started documenting protests, riots, social upheaval as a result of the coalition government that was elected in 2010, following the recession in 2008 and the subsequent bailouts. What I've always realised is that there's a discrepancy between what media reports versus what actually is happening on the ground. But in 2010, I was actually in the centre of the student riots outside Parliament. And when I saw the news reports over the following days, what I saw was a very real first-hand example of the difference between what I experienced versus what was the narrative in the press. And through some strong discussions at work, what I decided to do in the end was, well, take the initiative to report it for myself, how I saw things, my views and opinions on things. Well, I can't take 100% of the credit for that. I've got to say that I must give a shout out to Nicola Keane from the NicolaKeane.com, who's also an impassioned blogger and Instagrammer. She basically got tired of me moaning about things and said to me, well, what are you going to do about it? Don't moan about it, do something about it. And having always been someone that's taken action for things, I decided, well, why not? So I wasn't really that well versed back in 2010 on the world of blogging. I was quite an avid watcher of documentaries and YouTube and different things at the time, but blogging not so much. So I started a blog called Newell News, Newell News International it became, and that was a play on News International and trying to be like an antithesis to what was going on with the Murdoch press and how they spin a story a certain way. More recently, we've seen them post pictures of Jeremy Corbyn allegedly dancing at the cenotaph when actually he was walking with a war veteran and have a discussion with him, but they cropped the picture to make it look like he was having a dance and besmirching the memory of fallen soldiers. So that's why New News International, and that's how it began. And initially it was just more like an opinion column. I would read the news, like watch all sorts of different news, from BBC and Sky to Al Jazeera, Fox, CNN, Sputnik, Russia Today, and see how they reported the different stories. And then at the end of the day, I would have my own view on or take on what I thought was being said. But from that, I then started attending more of these protests, riots, etc. And I began writing about things in the first person from how I saw it. Now, being a student of history, I've always been acutely aware of the difference between primary, secondary and tertiary sources, and also the issue that you have in terms of history effectively being written by the victor. One thing I do remember explicitly writing about back then was the age of the internet would hopefully enable us to have a more accountable view of what happened in the past. But since then, and as years gone by, we've seen Google come along with the right to forget, and a series of other pieces of legislation have come in that have basically enabled people to delete things from the history of the internet. And we've also had people like the Tory government who deleted things from their website, from their manifestos in 2010, and also I believe from 2015, so that you couldn't look back to see what they had previously said. So that's why it's always important to take a screenshot or save the file. So I used to do a lot of this, collecting evidence and using it for a later date to compare the story. So that's how Newell News kind of began. And then sometime around 2011, early 2011, I started making videos. One night I was just laying there and I watched a lot of documentaries on YouTube and things that people have made, and I thought, why not? I had iMovie on my MacBook, so fired it up and started making a video to a song that I liked and just populated it with images to try and just see how it worked, really. And it was quite well received. It had a few hundred views. I didn't really have any subscribers, so having a few hundred views was quite interesting to see how that world works. So I called that Deja Vusion Productions. Now, when I was younger, I was a big fan of The Matrix and philosophy. Always been a big fan of philosophy, and I like the idea of the black cat, and the Deja Vusion thing just kind of came from that, and from this following another page, Domino's Falling Productions. So between The Matrix and this other account that I followed, I came up with the name Deja Vusion Productions. and entered into the world of video editing. I made several videos, and some were more successful than others. I had a go at making a couple of little videos on my own. One was about using a lifesaver bottle, which is the bottle that you can get and take to any water source in the world, and it uses a reciprocating primer, pump up and down, to filter out the water and make it clean enough for you to drink. So I had a little dabble around these different things, and eventually went into full video editing. And videography. I became not just a journalist in the sense of going down with a pencil and paper and taking notes and speaking to people. I was documenting things through photography, videography, and making videos. And I covered a number of protests through different emergency service strikes, primarily the fire service, all the way through to the recent protests in London over the Gaza assault in 2014. So yeah, I've done a lot of different videography things, and Deja Vision Productions was the name for that. And at the time I was doing all this, I started doing a photography series, which I came to call Life in Perspective. And through my videography and interviewing people for different things I was doing, making small documentaries and the like, I started taking pictures of people and telling their stories. And I guess you could say it was similar to the idea of Humans in New York, but it wasn't. It was a primary focus at the time on homeless people. And what I found was talking to these homeless people is more than money, what they really appreciate is time. Now I sat down with more people on the streets and had a conversation with them than I ever took photos of. And I always found at the end of it, it was the time that I took to sit down and have a conversation with them about all sorts of different things that they valued more than me buying them a cup of tea or some food, or leaving some pennies for them to do whatever they wish to do with. So we are social creatures, and I think modern society has very much isolated us, even though we have all these different social media apps and tools and phones, and we can be, in some ways we're more connected than we've ever been in the history, but we're also more disconnected. And taking the time sometimes to sit with these homeless people really kind of brought that to my attention. So I called the photography series Life in Perspective, and it's kind of evolved now into this idea of Life in Perspective as a podcast slash video podcast for me to sit down and talk to people about all the different things that make up our lives. So I'm hoping to cover various things from politics, philosophy, training. Sorry, excuse me. Got a lot of friends that are into training, bodybuilding. One of my friends was Mr. UK in 1995. We've made a couple of documentaries and stuff together, so you'll get to catch up with him and hear about his view on training today versus training in the 80s. He's a little bit older than me, so he can remember it when training really exploded in the 70s and 80s, because he's a bit of an old boy now, I guess. He probably won't like me for saying that, but sorry, Swaney. And so there you go. That's Life in Perspective. It began as a Newell News International blog. It morphed into a more encompassing kind of media production side of things. Red Pill Medium, Deja Vision Productions, which focus a lot on video editing of other people's work, using that narrative of story to get across a point. To photography, something that's always been a part of my life as a young lad. My grandfather was a photographer, and I spent a lot of time developing photos with him with the old film cameras, and it then morphed into where it is now, which is hopefully going to be a podcast that people will listen to. They will share amongst their friends. How you judge what a success is I guess measured in not by likes, thumbs up, shares. I like to measure success. For me, is measured by how it influences people. And whilst my videos might not have had 10, 15, 20 million views, I have had a certain number of contacts from personal contacts from people I've never met before, who've told me how the videos that I've made have influenced them. And I've always believed if you can drop pebbles in a pond, the ripples will cross the pond in time. And what our duty is to do is to keep throwing pebbles in that pond and hopefully one day they can become tidal waves, and we'll have a tidal wave of change. So life in perspective is going to be about a myriad of things, different subjects. As time goes by, we'll engage the audience to see what subjects they want to talk about in the future. We'll try and get various different experts in different fields in to talk about different things. We'll have we won't just have people that share same opinions about things. We'll have other people that will have different opinions to my view on the world or your view on the world. And it's hopefully going to be a place where we can really sit down and debate and talk things through. And if I manage to influence even one person with the podcast, then to me that is a success. And I guess all I have to say now is the first podcast is coming up for 15 minutes long. Thank you for listening. Good journey, take care, and I'll speak to you soon.